Okay, welcome back to chapter 2 of the reading for Where All Light Tends to Go, a novel by David Joy. Jack Pounds crowded the property and all but a tiny sliver carved out a long time ago to make room for a house. The old pine plank cabin Mama lived in had always sat in an angle just right, enough to hold off folding in a strong wind. The house was truly unfit for any sort of long-term living, but she'd been there most of her life. Boards once pitch dark had lightened with years and rotted with rainwater that held this place damp year-round. Transparent plastic I'd put over the windows to keep her from freezing a few winters back, hung loose and torn from the frames, the plastic now opaque and dotted with mildew. I wasn't old enough to remember the day Daddy sent her here. The way he told it, she was still in crank and spent most of her time climbing around the peter tree. So he sent her to this place. Loved her too much to give her nothing, but giving her anything at all squared things so he'd never have to love her again. I don't recall going over there much when I was a kid. I don't remember seeing her but once or twice a year when those I'm going to set this right moods hit her. It was always just me and Daddy. But I was old now, old enough to take the good and the bad for what it was worth and never any more. Besides, I just needed a place to kill a few hours, a safe spot to dodge the law when I was stoned. The front screen door was propped open with a tin bucket half filled with blackened sand and smashed out cigarette butts, and I could see straight through the house. I heard her before I saw her, yelling profanities, breathing heavy, snorting and sniffing. From the sound of her, a line of dope had just lit her afire, and while it may have seemed wild to anyone on the outside, I knew I was lucky to catch her at the beginning rather than at the end. She rammed her shoulder hard against the doorway into the kitchen as I came into the house, her eyes wide. She seemed to look right through me. Her jaw racked and her teeth chomped on some imaginary thing she could never get chewed enough to swallow. When her eyes pulled back and settled onto me, she went into scratching her arms. "Where the hell you come from?" She meant that question wholeheartedly, as if maybe I just manifested out of the Appalachian summer. "Just pulled up. Need a place to hide out for a bit." "Well, just for a time." "Just in time for what?" "Just in time to help me find that goddamn light bulb." Her head yanked to the side, and she scurried into the back of the house, but I didn't follow. I plopped down on a ratty couch within falling distance from the front door, foam pushing through tears in the cushions. I reached into the pocket and took out what was left of a sack of weed, just shake now, but still enough to roll a pin. There was a half-empty pack of jobs, rolling papers propped against a tarnished brass lamp on the side table. I pulled a paper from the sleeve, creased a fold of the 1.5s, and dumped in buds had been ground to powder. I was already twisting it tight and licking the seal. Mama stumbled back into the front door. Jacob, you gonna help me look?" "Look for what?" "That goddamn light bulb. I done told you I need a goddamn light bulb." I lounged back on the couch, struck a light to the end of the joint, pulled hard, and offered it towards her for a drag. "Have you lost your ever fucking mind, Jacob? You know I don't smoke that shit. You can't smoke in here. You got to go outside if you're gonna be smoking that shit, 'cause that last thing I need is a goddamn law." My mom was the definition of rode hard and put up wet. Her eyes were bulbous, her face sunken in, just a thin layer of skin stretched tight over bones. Hair that was thick and brown and old pictures strung greasy down her neck. She was nothing like those pictures anymore, though she was exactly how I always remembered. She was absolutely pitiful. Before I could even respond, she was off again hunting that light bulb, and I just loafed off there and took Toked till a run crept down to the seam of the joint. Licking a little spit on the tip of my finger, I dabbed that fire, keeping it burning even, and I hit it again. I slid my cell phone out of my pocket and checked to see if Maggie had written me back. She hadn't. I knew she'd respond eventually, because she always did, just never right away. Maggie hadn't cut me out entirely, but there seemed to be a few words left between us, or words too heavy for either of us to say. She loved me too much to let me go. I love her too much to drag her down. That type of love doesn't work. I recognized it before she did, I guess. So instead of hurting her for a lifetime, I broke her heart. Right there and then. And now she's gone. Probably in another world, I thought. And I leaned back onto the couch, smoking onto that joint to find a universe of my own. I could hear Mama in the back cussing, drawers being ripped off the rails and slamming against the floor. Only when there was nothing else to throw did she return to, "Jacob, what the fuck did you do with the goddamn light bulb?" I laughed and coughed and spit on words that couldn't make it out of my mouth quick enough to stop me from choking. "I didn't do nothing with the light bulb." She had me gasped. But there was always uneasiness in laughing at my mother. Even while I was laughing, there was an uncomfortable feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach. Well, she'd given birth to me. She was my blood. Those types of things are deserving of love. And I did love her. Since I was a kid, I'd carried those few moments when she came around sober like treasure. I'd always hoped she'd become a real mother. But with time I realized that someone can't give what they don't have. She was what she was. An addict when there was nothing that could be said or done to change it. Death was her only savior. Staring intensely, her eyelids seeming to roll back even further. Her eyes were like marbles. She swept her hair back against her neck, trotted over to the couch, and cannonballed down beside me. "Give me a hit of that shit. You didn't even want me to smoke it inside, and now you want a hit of it?" I leaned away from her and took a few quick drags off the roach that was already burning my fingertips. Her jaw still racked like she was trying to saw logs with dull teeth, and that serious look never left her face. "What the fuck do you mean I didn't want you smoking inside? That's what you said? You told me I had to smoke outside." "I didn't ever say that shit." She scooted closer. "Give it here." I bent forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and held the roach out to her. Mama picked it from my fingers like some cranked out chimp, culling fleas, and I stood up from the couch to let her lay with it. She sucked back on what little bit of paper was left to burn, and all of a sudden that son of a bitch shot into her throat, and she went to choking, till I sure her eyeballs were going to pop out of her head. I couldn't stop laughing. Fell onto the doorframe all the way to the bathroom while she coughed and gagged and tried her damnedest to curse me out with enough air to start and blow and go. There was tears streaming down my eyes. By the time I made it in the front bathroom mirror, I pulled a bottle of eye drops out of my pocket, tilted my head back, squeezed a bend into each eye, and stared at my reflection. Seeing a smile spread across my face lumped that uneasy feeling into my throat. I shouldn't have found how bad off she was funny, but with a lifetime of disappointments, it was the only way to handle it. Smiles outweighed tears. Laughter, it outweighed pain. I turned on the faucet and wiped a palm full of water across my face. Daddy needed to see me an hour. He'd never liked handling business when I was stoned. My green eyes began to clear, and I brushed my thick brown hair with my wet hand. Daddy never cared that I smoked. He didn't care that I popped pills. He drank, smoked, and was known to eat a few painkillers when the mood hit him. The only drug off limits was crank, and seeing what it had done to my own mama, I'd never wanted anything to do with it anyways. But the line of work my father ran demanded a clear head. so I had to appear collected. When I headed into the main room, Mama was in the kitchen, one foot standing in the seat of a dining room chair, the other foot propped up onto the back. She leaned out over the table to get her hands on a light bulb, her head constantly shaking her hair away as she twisted the bulb free. Her shirt lifted up and her belly hung out loose, skin, no meat, stretch marks, still visible after all those years from where she'd carried me. Just when I was about to speak, the chair rocked and she slapped down out of there onto the floor. Her head smacked the laminate tile so hard, but it didn't faze her. She popped up to her knees and scanned the room, her jaw still chewing. And I didn't say a word. I left her there, on the floor like a bad joke. A bad joke that's really not funny at all, but that a man is forced to chuckle through until the awkwardness. See you next time for Chapter 3.